All right, Kelsey, you think we should get started?
Yes, let's do it. I'll click you forward to your business slides.
All right, three, two, one. Hey, welcome to yet another virtual education session for the American Academy of Pediatrics Section on Emergency Medicine Education Subcommittee. A couple of business, basically advertisements for what we do at the national conference. If you are interested in submitting a cool case for PEMPICS, which I encourage you to do, especially if you have a resident or fellow, or if you're one of those, one section on emergency medicine member must be on the team that submits the case. Last year, Manisha got a record number of cases. And so, yeah, in the chat, she says, send cool cases. Seriously, anything is out there. EKGs, ultrasounds, CTs, rashes, they are all game. Pempix.com is your home for all things submission, and you've got until the end of the month to submit. Email Manisha if you have questions. Oh yeah, Instagram at pem.pix. We tried to get at pempix and somebody is squatting on it and we couldn't get it, but pem.pix is a wonderful portal to old cases, recent cases. Manisha will post them and then you can come back later and find out the diagnosis. It's gathering quite a following. So pempix. Emerge quiz. Guess what? If you want to submit a case, you can't, but that's okay. Because Meredith, how many cases did you get this year? A lot.
Somewhere between 30 and 40.
Yeah, that is a lot of cases. And so there's a dedicated team of judges that are reviewing all of those. 4 fellows will be selected to present live at the national conference, where they will be paired up with another fellow to see if they can get the case. And then we will also post cases online that almost made the cut, but not quite. And then Battle Royale. This is the new competition and educational session at the NCE Committee for the Future. Dennis Wren, myself, we're planning this. It's basically 4 people will present in their best style an 8-minute educational presentation on any topic relevant to PEM. They're going to have entrance music, a ring announcer, live commentary, no Brad in spandex. It's going to be themed after a pro wrestling event. I'm still trying to get pyro. It's probably not going to happen. You have until the end of the month to nominate yourself or a colleague. We will reach out to somebody. We want this to be a showcase for young faculty, young physicians in our field. And so fellows graduating this year and faculty in their first 10 years are eligible. All the details and some teaser trailers at babbleroyale.org. That QR code will take you to the entry form. Now, I'm going to pass the mic to Kelsey.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. We all know we have lots going on. So I agree with Brad. It's so amazing that everyone's so dedicated to education to show up and spend sort of 2 hours of your time with us. So we already went through our updates and reminders. So for those of you who like to check boxes, you already get to check one off, which is great. We're going to spend the rest of the afternoon talking about how we might think about using AI in pediatric emergency medicine. And because we're an educational group, we're going to have a little bit of a slant towards that, but a sort of broad net that we're casting. Our hope is to do this in 2 parts. The first is to do a little bit of show and tell. I personally have found thinking about how to use AI is sometimes an overwhelming thing to contemplate. And so hopefully by diving into some ways that people are specifically using it, we will be able to get your creative juices flowing. And then we'll also have a panel discussion. We have questions, but what we really want is to hear the questions that you have for us. And so we're excited to engage with you. And you'll see there's a QA function here that you can put questions in, and both during the show and tell and the panel discussion. So moving on to our show and tell. I'm first going to say there's going to be these nice musical interludes. These are creations by Brad. And so if you scan these QR codes, you can get access to a couple of 30-minute songs that he has created using AI related to educational topics in PEM. I don't know, Brad, if you want to introduce anything more here.
Oh, they're only 30 seconds. 30 minutes is.
Yeah, sorry, 30 seconds.
I'm writing the rock opera in the background. I'm not gonna. These are all different genres. I wrote the lyrics and then I throw it into an app called Udio, and I specify different genres and tags like male vocalist, pop punk. And then I use AI tools to make the album covers. And then I put them on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and they're just silly and ridiculous and maybe earworms, but we'll see. So scan them, give them a listen, or not. They're just there for fun and education.
So perfect. So here you can check out Tick Tick Boom, as well as Target Sign. And one of the fun things to do is think about what each of these might be based about. So I'll give people one more second to scan that, and you'll see a few more of these throughout the presentation. So I'm going to kick us off with the show and tell, with the disclaimer that the people you're about to hear from are meant to sort of represent a spectrum of engagement with AI, both in terms of the ways they're using it and the savviness with which they're using it. And I would put myself very far on the beginner spectrum in that I have no background in informatics or sort of was not a great user of computers in like any sort of innovative way. I sort of feel like I'm a nuts and bolts kind of person. But I really have spent a lot of time thinking about AI and the space for AI in academic writing. And so what you see here is, this is actually from UNESCO and their sort of guidance on when you can use ChatGPT. And I think what's really interesting is that if you really follow this, for us, you sort of get to it's unsafe to use ChatGPT, right? It matters if the output is true. There is an expectation that the work should be your own. And so I think what I think about is, are there ways where when there's an expectation that the work should be your own and that the output is true, that you can use AI? And I think one of the big things there is, do you have the expertise to verify that that output is accurate? And are you willing to take responsibility? And so we'll sort of talk about ways to use it in academic writing. So there's sort of a few approaches that I have found helpful in using it for academic writing, which is first iterative prompting, which I'll showcase. I think the second and third are like functionally how I use it, which is boosting creativity. You know, it's always great when you get together with a team and you get to think about and brainstorm together, but sometimes that's hard to do. And sometimes it's hard to get people at your institution that have the same interests, or it's just logistically hard when you're writing. And so think of ChatGPT as the sort of always available writing partner for you. And then also as a sort of helpful editor. So in terms of iterative prompting, I just put an example in here, but rarely when you engage with it, is it going to be helpful on the first prompt. And so this was sort of me thinking about doing a project related to debriefing. And so I started with just asking it to define the terms. And then I sort of was able, and this is where that expertise comes in, to be like, okay, here, I specifically want you to tell me about the advantages and disadvantages. And who am I? I'm a medical education researcher, and I practice pediatric emergency medicine. And then you can sort of get it to start giving you more specific things. So I asked it to list and summarize articles, which was really helpful, because then I could be like, do I want to read this? Do I not want to read this? And then I sort of finally came to it with my educational hat of, all right, I know that it has many benefits, but I'm particularly interested in the educational ones. Can you provide anything that's specifically related to that? And I will say, David, it eventually got me to your articles, but it took a little bit. So don't expect the first output that you generate to sort of be necessarily the most helpful. I think the other thing, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's many things it can't search. And so it can't actually get access to, for example, David's article on debriefing. It can access to the abstract. And so you are going to be limited in what it can generate. And that's why you sort of need to be expert enough to know what you're getting and what you're not getting. I love it for creativity and brainstorming. And so I just did a prompt for this one, how AI might be used for academic writing and health professions education. Here are my arguments that it can generate additional ideas. It can provide feedback. It's an easily accessible writing partner. Can you suggest counter arguments, right? And so this sort of checked on your thought process. And it actually came up with pretty good ones. The loss of human connection, the potential for over-reliance and dependency, and the quality and accuracy of AI-generated content. And so you can imagine, if you're writing a paper, that this can be a really helpful way to say, here are my arguments. Tell me what some of the reviewer pushback might be. And then finally, I think we've probably all gotten revise and resubmits where they tell you to like change something about how you write. And this is where I have successfully used it a fair amount, which is that you can put in sections of your text and ask ChatGPT to sort of edit it for you. When I do that, again, the prompt becomes really important. So sort of telling it not to lose any ideas, telling it to maintain the tone. So ChatGPT likes to write in this flowery sort of verbose tone. And so telling it what you want. And then I always ask it to list the edits and give me the reasons for them so that I can be like, that makes sense, that doesn't make sense. And so you can see just a couple here where it helps me improve as a writer, but also helps me sort of understand whether I should use that suggestion or not. There's lots of caveats and challenges just to highlight, and we may come back to more of these in our discussion. The edits it proposes often make it different, not better. Like it will do a lot of just substituting a different word for the word you already have, which is not necessarily going to make something more concise or more clear. For most of us, the data selection is a black box, meaning you don't know what it is searching. And so that is where this recommendation of using it in domains that you know comes from, as well as this idea of probing what's missing. So when I was doing the probes for debriefing, I asked it, can you access Annals of Emergency Medicine? Can you access AEM education and training? And found out it couldn't, right? And so that was sort of helpful for me to know what is it looking at and what is it not, as well as sort of what time periods is looking at it. And it tends towards the Western world. So just thinking about that's what it's going to be searching. Again, there's no privacy and no data security. And I think sort of most importantly is you're accountable. And so it's great for ideas and brainstorming. It's not great for words. So sort of making sure you're not copying and pasting anything from ChatGPT. And then when is it, I think the other thing for us writers is that it's really unclear how journals are going to handle this yet, right? Every journal has now sort of added the question of, did you use AI? But sort of how that's going to be received by reviewers and how that's going to be received by editors and what is a suitable AI disclosure, I think is still sort of unclear. I'm also seeing a comment in the chat. There's a bunch of other sort of AI related things for academics. And you can see a couple of them, Research Rabbit and Open Evidence. And again, all of these is sort of understanding what they're searching. The other plug I wanted to give is for AI and qualitative research. So if you do interviews or focus groups or observations and you need to transcribe things, the AI transcription technology has gotten quite good. So if you do in-person technology, it guarantees sort of 99% accuracy. AI is greater than 90%, and it's a pennies on the dollar compared to the cost. So depending on sort of how much you need that last 8% of accuracy, it's instantaneous and fairly accurate, and you can transcribe an unlimited amount basically for like less than $30 a month through services like Rev. So I use that quite a bit. And then the one other thing to highlight that I've started playing with is for anyone who does qualitative research, and coding is incredibly time intensive. And now AI will sort of do coding for you through Atlas TI. And so I'm just going to showcase a little bit about that. But what you do is you input your intention. And so they ask for your research question and your context. And what's cool is it will save what you've put in before so that you can keep iterating on it as you sort of try to teach it to code what you want. Then it will generate sort of questions and larger code categories, but you're able to edit those and you're able to add questions. And so again, it's going to generate and you can iterate and edit. And then it will take your documents and in seconds, it will generate codes and subcodes and organize those and link those. So a sort of really powerful, again, you're probably going to want to read it. You're probably going to want to add, you're probably going to want to iterate, but sort of way faster than just sitting there and reading everything line by line for yourself. So just to highlight that. But now I'm very excited to pass the mic over to my other presenters who are using AI in sort of very interesting and creative ways. And I will, again, everyone should just keep watching the chat because there's going to keep being resources popping up in there, and we'll share this meeting recording after. So as we give a chance, we're just going to go in alphabetical order. So I'm going to have Aaron get ready to bring up his slides, but here's a couple more YouTube videos for you to download. Something's brewing in here, or brewing here. And dog mented. Perfect. And I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Aaron.
All right, thank you. I'm learning so much already, I feel like. Can you see my slides okay? And sounds coming in okay as well?
Everything looks great.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me. So I'm Aaron Kornblith. I'm an associate professor of emergency medicine and pediatrics at UCSF. And I use AI in the research space. I'm learning all of these tools right now. I haven't done a lot of the sampling Brad has done. I haven't done some of the graphics and that sort of thing. And so it's really cool to see all the tools here. I have 10 minutes to share with you. So instead of really focusing on a project, I thought I would share with you some of the thoughts I have on the role of clinicians in medical AI. Just really quickly, my disclosures, I do have grant funding from the University of California, the NIH, and the NSF. And then I am a consultant and co-founder of the UCSF spin-out Capture DX. But in this lecture, I'll do my best to give a balanced presentation of sort of my journey as a clinician in AI for medicine. So in 2009, I ran a local shoestring pediatric fast curriculum, which included a hands-on workshop and journal club using most of Kern's 6 steps. And for those of you not familiar, Kern's is the framework for medical education and curriculum development. But also in 2009, I taught at the first ever AAP point of care ultrasound workshop. And then in 2016, things kind of came full circle for me. And I had just completed my fellowship training in pediatric emergency ultrasound, and then had the opportunity to direct the AAP's ultrasound workshop myself in San Francisco. However, also in 2016, Dr. Jeffrey Hinton, the computer scientist and godfather of AI, recommended that we stop training experts to read diagnostic imaging like ultrasound. He predicted that deep learning would replace experts within 5 years or at most 10. He said, like a coyote looking over a cliff but not knowing the ground is already out from beneath him, Dr. Hinton predicted that my emergency ultrasound training was obsolete. Oh no, I thought, I better get on board. So we've made some tremendous strides in the world of medical AI. However, there was something missing from Dr. Hinton's prediction. And I disagree with Dr. Hinton that we should stop training clinicians. And instead, I'm going to double down and recommend that we not only continue training clinicians, but also start training clinicians on how to train AI. So I recently returned home after spring medical conference season and AI was buzzing. And in talking with our colleagues, I learned that the majority of us believe that AI is something that's going to happen for us, or some have a take that it will happen to us. Either way, it's a bad take. And the only way for us to get around this sort of black box of AI is for clinicians to be involved. I've been fortunate to participate in several AI projects using computer vision, large language models, and advanced prediction modeling. And the number one question I usually get asked is, how do you find an AI or data science team to work with you? So the truth is, there is a lot of computer science talent out there. So let me introduce you to Rishi. Rishi was 17 years old and in high school when I met him. And Rishi and I worked together on building a deep learning classifier for ultrasound images. For his work, he won the San Diego Science and Engineering Fair, and he also was able to take part in the MIT Beaver Summer Intern Program to obtain more advanced training. If you ask Rishi what the hardest part of the project was, it wasn't the AI. It was first identifying a problem, and second, making sure we were using the right data and tools to address the problem. So before you go looking for a data scientist or an AI tool, I'd like to share with you 2 guiding principles and how we as clinicians should be thinking about using AI. The first is we need to define the problem. So this is what the NIH calls the unmet need. It's what Kern calls problem identification, or the startup world calls the product market fit. So here is the right upper quadrant view of the FAST. And one of the challenges with FAST is ensuring we identify a complete study, meaning we see all the appropriate landmarks. For example, we want to ensure we see the landmark Morrison's pouch, which is the potential space above the kidney. In a not particularly well-defined clinical problem, we would ask a model, where is the kidney? After collecting data, labeling images, and modeling, the team has an output and it gives an outline of the kidney. So here is a model that is segmenting the kidney. On the left, we see an ultrasound video of a FAST, and on the right, we see the output of an AI model doing its best to characterize the kidney. But let's think about what this model is actually doing. As part of the FAST, we are asking about a potential space and not the organ itself. So unfortunately, we didn't frame this question correctly. So what we received was a segmented kidney model instead of a model showing us the location of Morrison's pouch. This is an AI project that fell into the problem pitfall. By not having a completely corrected stated problem, the output can't be used in a clinically useful way. So how do we avoid this pitfall? So we have to understand the need. We have seen many examples of AI in medicine in which teams develop technically interesting models that are clinically useless. The need or problem isn't something we get from pondering in the lab. The problem is something that is recognized in the clinical, educational, or quality improvement space. A problem is something that fits into a workflow, and ideally, this is an existing workflow. So for example, are antibiotics taking too long? Is it that the learners aren't communicating with confidence during resuscitations? Or in my case, is it that the FAST isn't being used to its potential? Next, the problem is something where the current workflow can be improved. So an improvement can mean multiple different things, but it's usually one or more of the following: faster, cheaper, more accurate, or providing a new capability. So as you can imagine, it's very difficult for an outsider who hasn't worked in one of these workflows to evaluate all of these points. And this is why AI needs you. So say we identified a problem, and now we need to understand how we're going to develop a solution. When I started doing this work, I had this optimistic innocence that I would identify a problem, find the data, and then drop the data into a machine, which would then give me the solution. Almost like how I envisioned my Instapot, dropping in some of the ingredients and out comes sort of a perfectly cooked one-pot lasagna. Unfortunately, it's really not that easy. You need to do the prep work. And this is the most challenging, creative, but also rewarding part of the work. We call this the problem behind the problem. So here's an example using FAST. First, we need to understand that there's a hierarchy to diagnostic imaging annotations. So for example, in this FAST, I've labeled the image as containing Morrison's pouch. In contrast, in this annotation strategy, we're using bounding boxes to highlight Morrison's pouch. But even further along the hierarchy is this annotation strategy using pixel level annotation to draw Morrison's pouch. So depending on what you think the end user wants will dictate which strategy you go with. But you need to keep in mind that your labeling or annotation strategies are also governed by time-cost trade-off, meaning it's much easier to put Morrison's pouch label on the image than it is to draw all these pixel level segmentations. So for example, I could do like 200 labels in an hour, but only 30 of these pixel level segmentations in that same hour. So the problem behind the problem is deciding how to best meet the needs of your user in an efficient way that answers the problem. Our team spends a ton of time writing out the options and final decisions of these tasks. So the trick to getting this done successfully is that every problem behind the problem requires a user manual in which we keep a visual representation and notes in how we're performing these tasks. So no matter how big or small. So for example, if Brad is creating a song, he needs to write out his lyrics and make sure he keeps note of those lyrics. So in the future, if someone were to reference or want to have reference to his lyrics, they could go back to them. So I need to emphasize how important it is to create these user manuals because they help with choosing the most efficient task, building consistency, allowing room for feedback and iteration. And it's the document that you use at the end of the project to help remember how you carried out each of these tasks. So one of my mentors is Dr. Atul Butte here at UCSF, and he says, all the data in the world will not make a difference unless there are people ready to use it. So in summary, when considering taking on an AI project, first remember to define the problem through understanding workflows and being very clear in your communication of the problem. And then second, address the problem behind the problem by using a user manual for helping ensure you have aligned your task to the problem in an efficient, consistent, and reproducible manner. And a big thank you to my team who's helped actually go through these iterative processes and kind of walk through all of this stuff. So, and that's all I have for today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And people can feel free to put questions into the Q&A at any time. I will save them for when we come back to the larger discussion. But next, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. So I am really excited to join this group and mostly just learn from everyone. I consider myself a dabbler. In terms of what I chose for a demo today, it's going to be an ultrasound application. I'll show you real quick. Let me pull up screen, step one, see if this works. All right, give me a thumbs up if you could see it. Or a head nod, that works. You guys don't follow instructions well, that's fine. So it's interesting, like Aaron, I've done a lot of work with ultrasound annotation because I'm a big believer in point of care ultrasound, and I think we're not maximizing its potential because it's not enough hands. So of course, I've done a lot of work with AAP in this section on ultrasound education, and I think we've come a long way as a specialty, but in terms of global reach of point of care ultrasound in pediatrics, AI is both inevitable and going to really, I think, be a game changer in terms of improving child's health. But a lot of the work I've done has been so far in terms of the funding, it's big companies that are sort of financing a lot of it. And it's a very expensive process to get, especially if you want to get a diagnostic application on the market, your FDA approval and stuff like that. So in the spirit more of like where I hope it's going is reclaiming this as open source and free and open accessible medical education. I set out just sort of with a local team to see, okay, well, what we can do with a couple of students, and can we get from sort of concept to real-time availability that's machine agnostic. So this project was basically unfunded and just with students who are in the undergrad. And I mean, those who know me know I'm a little bit obsessed with the infant lumbar puncture procedure and training around that, especially even though it's not a very fundable procedure. So if you're interested in research, don't follow my example in terms of that. Choose a more fundable procedure. But I think most people on this call are going to be familiar with the procedure. Maybe less are familiar with how to use ultrasound in terms of guiding that procedure. So let's say you're going to choose your spot around L4, L5. Typically, ultrasound can be used to help look inside that interspace in infants who are practically see-through to see, do you actually have a space with fluid in it and with spinal cord. So here on the right, without spinal cord. So here on the right, you see in yellow sort of pointing towards the black, which is spinal fluid collecting in that canal where you're going to be putting the needle in. And here is an outline of the spinal fluid on left in green, and on the right, I've outlined in red the spinal cord. So green, yes, go, we want to put a needle there. If you see red, you are probably way too high up or it's a tethered cord and you do not want to stick a needle into that. So this was a simple segmentation problem, as Aaron was pointing out. And initially, we did it just in terms of bounding boxes, and our next phase is going to be localization in terms of pixel level. But just at the bounding box phase, I also wanted to sort of get early to deployment and what would this look like to be able to use it on any machine around the world. And so the students developed just last month this website, which is what I'm going to demo to you, where you can basically either upload a picture you have on your computer, or you can go up to the machine, take a picture with your iPhone, and in real time take a look and see whether or not you have fluid or cord. So I'm going to just play the video. This is me doing it on the computer, trying to find where I put the file. But again, this could be done real time on the phone. And really, it's just running the algorithm in the background to quickly get you an answer. And here, the output's just telling you, in this picture, yes, there is fluid present and there's no spinal cord, so you're good to go with your needle. So we're going to be working this summer to sort of fine tune the algorithm and make sure the accuracy is improved. And then I'm hoping that some might join in a pilot of seeing, how does this work for education? So a clinical test of it, again, like I said, is a whole other beast. But I think, in terms of when we go to the bedside and we're trying to teach somebody what they're looking at, this is one of the futures, I think, for AI and ultrasound, is that if you can get that pixel level annotation, it could really show the learner, this is what I'm looking for. And you could do that then by yourself with just, your camera and your AI. So the website is really slow because it's on a free server, but feel free to play with it and send feedback my way. We'll still be working on the algorithm on the back end.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. And now we're going to turn it over to Selin.
Hi guys, it's nice to see everybody. I am going to take a hard left from Aaron and Dave's very sophisticated visual AI and pixelations back to even more left of Kelsey's spectrum of beginner AI. I think I know many faces. It's nice to see so many familiar faces, but I am in the Department of EM and PEDS at NYU. Serve as the Vice Chair for Education for EM, as well as the outgoing Program Director for our PEM Fellowship with Ellen Duncan, incoming as the Program Director in July. And similar to Kelsey, I don't have any disclosures. Some of this work is supported by some internal meta grants. Some of you might have heard about some of this work that we're doing with AI here, but I do have lots of caveats, which one is that I'm not an informaticist or data analyst. I'm not a techie in any way. And in fact, I consider myself somewhat of a Luddite and a later adapter in the innovation adaptation curve, typically for technology. And so even like worse than this is that I was a creative writing major. So this is my idea of what writing should look like, or maybe a little bit like Dave Kessler today is what a writer should look like. And at first I was very offended by the notion of using AI for writing because it kind of offended my world. Are you guys seeing slides or are you seeing notes, by the way? Slides only.
We see your notes right now too.
Oh, okay. Let me just go to regular slideshow. There we go. And so, part of me was confused why I was asked to join, but hopefully I'll provide the clinician educator viewpoint and sort of an entry into AI, and also just how you become somewhat of a late adapter of technology. And now I'm like fully convinced that this will, help those of us who especially do medical education, maybe like tap into some of the innovation and imagination by offloading some of the scut work and helping us, tap into some more creative potential. And I think the other big caveat is that I have the benefit here of, Aaron mentioned to sort of collaborations and finding the right people to work with. I'm very spoiled that I have here at NYU the benefit of working with the IAME. And for those of you who were at recently the NEGEA conference, you might have heard Mark Triolo speaking. I feel a little bit like a stunt double sometimes in talking about this work, because some of it is work that I personally am doing, but a lot of it is really collaborative work supported by the IAME, which is this wonderful multidisciplinary team of faculty, educators, education scientists, data analysts, and informaticists who can sort of apply technology into education. And to that end, again, speaking of collaborations, our clinical informaticists, I think some of you know, Aaron knows him, Nick Jeans, is not an educator or, an educationalist by training. He's an informaticist, clinical informaticist by training, but has really embraced educational informatics, which I think has led, to a lot of beautiful departmental collaborations. So just like to be super concrete for those who might be intimidated by AI the way I was, on a very specific individual level, I'll go over kind of what I've used it for and some, very practical results, and then what we're doing sort of more in collaboration. And this now, the train has like left the station. I kind of was like really proud of myself, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, for using AI for letters of rec. I think by this point, almost everybody has done this, so it's not very innovative anymore, or even that intimidating probably. But I do think, Kelsey got at writing good prompts. And what I've honed over the last 6 to 8 months is just my prompts. So I tend to be very specific. I'm just going to flash through them. And I realized that my own letters of recommendation prior to AI were very formulaic. I would always start with an opening paragraph that describes who I am, and then I would summarize sort of who the learner is in terms of their education and training. And then I would typically break it into 3 paragraphs on teaching accomplishments, scholarly work, and mentorship. And now I just ask ChatGPT to do that, taking the structure that I have, and I usually add like a, second to closing paragraph that's much more personal, what I know about, the learner or mentee from a personal perspective, either their emotional intelligence or their personal lives, and have a concluding paragraph. And I kind of copy and paste these same prompts now to almost every letter of rec, and then I personalize it, heavily edited. And I will say that like, doesn't replace the workload, but it takes away maybe 40% of the work of creating a draft. And for me, the bigger part is that I work really well off drafts, but I have like a very high activation energy typically to write. And so I think of AI as my catalyst. Like it just takes that activation energy down, and kind of like a decent assistant gives me a draft to work off of. And I think a lot of people have probably seen this study recently in AEM-ENT. These are like nice violin plots of people rating AI generated versus human generated letters of recommendation based on what they suspect it to be and what the true authorship is, and rating it on sort of quality and persuasiveness, and point being there was no difference. The one caveat to this study, and I won't get into the details of it, is that it's very binary. It's either AI generated or a human generated letter of rec, where really I think the goal is that the humans use the AI, again, to take off some of that activation energy or as a catalyst rather than to replace our work, right? I think the real like concrete takeaway is that awards, especially letters of rec, are a bit of a numbers game. And doing this, I've been able to write very, very many more letters of rec for awards. So this is some of the folks in our department and their recent accomplishments. And I do feel like it has been able to generate sort of career advancement for mentees in a way that I just didn't have, honestly, the bandwidth for before AI. And either myself or colleagues immediately, other things similar to this vein are promotional dossiers. Coming up with a whole promotional dossier based on a CV is very onerous and very duplicative, and AI can really generate some of that, honestly, like very boring writing for us. Things like generating scripts for case-based scenarios, thinking about differential diagnoses for case-based studies, or thinking about OSCE work, it's been helpful for study cards, note cards, for exam prep, exam questions. It turns out, it's not that good at so far. I can at least produce some kind of a rough draft. Curricular mapping, and I'll show a little bit of this in a minute. Hot emails or hot feedback, ChatGPT has no emotions, and so taking some of what you really want to say and window washing it, I think it's a great use. And then translations, and everywhere that I say ChatGPT, we're actually using an internal NYU generated GPT-4, which takes external data but doesn't put data back into the environment, so that you can preserve, learner confidentiality and privacy. It's also HIPAA compliant, although we're not really using it just yet, based on internal regulations. This is an example of curricular mapping that's being used, in our shop. It's sort of taking lecture content from the UME and even GME levels and asking GPT to map it either USMLE content keywords or to mesh terms, and that way you can create curricular outlines sort of very readily. And that's helpful. And then also using it to generate some evidence-based goals and pooled resources to generate sort of goals for students and learners. Again, just kind of very concrete, pragmatic uses. along those lines, just from a workflow management perspective, every biannual sort of feedback summary cycle, we typically have the house staff sit down with program directors. In addition to their written evals, they express that they want to provide verbal feedback about faculty, and it takes away some of their psychological pressure in the written evals and generates some more qualitative feedback for faculty members. And it used to be a pretty onerous process of taking what the house staff said and putting that into constructive terms to then share either in verbal and or written feedback with faculty. So we have used some ambient generative AI to take some of that and again create first drafts. So this is like an example of some qualitative feedback. This faculty member spends way too long with patients, and for things like sign out, she spends half her shift charting in a corner, and it's hard to find her for precepting or help with critical patients. So not exactly phrased in a growth mindset way that you want to share with a faculty member. But then this is sort of whitewashed, AI with some of my editing as well, but pretty close to what the AI generated. So trainees express at length the time she spends seeing patients, finalizing management plans, conducting handoffs, and charting is perceived as impeding patient care and causes frustration. Have staff express that while they appreciate her bedside patient care, they are frustrated by difficulty locating her on shift and wish for more presence, availability, and support as a preceptor and also as a supervisor for patients. So maybe just more verbose, but hopefully also a little more, kind and growth directed. And then similar to the verbal feedback on an institutional level, some of our educational informaticists have worked to create basically Amazon reviews of faculty evals based on all of the evals in the system. So we use New Innovations. It has all of this data and it is, just hair-pullingly slow to generate the PDF of entire faculty evals. And again, biannually, as a program director now as vice chair, I would read all of the faculty evals. I would synthesize what they were saying in my own mind and send individual emails to faculty saying, here are your biannual evals. Please remember to look on New Innovations. It's great that I noticed you had wonderful feedback about, your precepting skills, but that learners desired a little more autonomy. It would take a lot of time to synthesize this and then also tease out which faculty members I should sit down with one-on-one for feedback verbally versus who could receive some of this in writing. And now, we're using generative AI to summarize all of the New Innovations evals and kind of like an Amazon review for faculty. There are hallucinations, some things aren't accurate. Certainly, we have a process whereby our program coordinators will sort of read through and do the first pass check, and I'll skim read and do a second pass check. Now I can just email this summary to the faculty rather than having to synthesize this myself. It sort of has two paragraphs that are a little duplicative. It still has some kinks to work out, but that summarize both in writing and in bullet point faculty member strengths, their areas for improvement. And in reading these summaries, I can now much more quickly, again, 40% rule, tease out, who to sit down with for one-on-one feedback and who can sort of receive written feedback in their writing reviews. So that's kind of just very practically individual level how I've been using it, and again, with a lot of support institutionally. Folks who are at PAS or SAEM might have heard about the next project I'll talk about, which is sort of form of curricular mapping that we're using. And it's a project that I hope will be generalizable across institutions, across EHRs, and even across fields eventually. But essentially, we have colleagues in internal medicine who, and multiple people in PEM too. I think Dan Schumacher did a lot of this work early on to say, we have a great way, a lens into what our learners are seeing clinically. That is the, EHR, and we use, ICD-10, ICD-9 codes to categorize what people are seeing, but these are really made for billing and coding. It's not like an educationally meaningful taxonomy. We can't extract, what our learners are maybe seeing in a meaningful way for us as educators, but can we transform this into something meaningful? Prior studies in PEDS and PEM have really just stuck with billing codes, but some colleagues in internal medicine, here at NYU, manually mapped, ICD-10 codes to ABIM categories, and created sort of heat maps, curricular maps of what learners see on a programmatic level and in individual learning dashboards. And so now that we have AI tools at our disposal, we thought about doing this in an automated way that would make it replicable across institutions and programs. And so really our goal has been to sort of take that notion of a crosswalk tool, taking ICD-10 codes and translating them into something educational meaningful, either ABP categories, ABEM categories, or other board specific categories, and creating sort of personalized educational dashboards and using that for curricular mapping. And the technology is similar to generative AI, but it's not really generative. It's a sentence transformer that uses GPT is the transformer technology, but it's not generative. It doesn't have a predictive step to it. It's basically large language models. And we've been using sort of vector embedding technology to look at how closely two terms are related. So you look at the proximity of your ICD-10 terms with your ABEM terms, and you give it a vector distance, and that sort of categorizes how closely these terms are mapped to each other. And so what we found sort of in the first couple of iterations of this is taking almost 6,000 unique ICD-10 codes from our EM department. What we found in terms of validity when we looked at using humans to validate the top 650 diagnoses is that to an ABEM category level 1, it was accurate in about 53% of the cases. When we went down to a level 2 category from ABEM, it was accurate almost 80%. And so we've been trying to troubleshoot, and I know we've discussed this with some of you here, this spring, that final 20% of diagnoses. How do we map that final 20%? Do we use sort of a true generative AI model? Or do we just use, by now this technology, the initial sentence transformers we use are about 2 years old. There's newer technology every day, and we think we can actually get closer to probably about 94, 95% with some newer technology, which is what we're doing now. And what this has generated is a personalized educational dashboard for our learners. So when they log in, they can look at the diagnosis they've seen according to these ABEM level 1 and level 2 categories, and compare that in an anonymized fashion to peers, what their peers are saying, seeing they can filter by patient demographics and filter by category, and then even drill down to the individual case they've seen. And it's allowing us to engage in subcurricular mapping. I think as next steps, we think, can we translate some of this to actually educational outcomes, performance on milestones, EPAs, site exams? Is there an association between, seeing lots of sepsis or seeing a few intense cases of sepsis that are admitted for, 2 weeks to performance in educational outcomes? And can that be correlated with patient outcomes? I think many folks here are familiar, again, with Adina Collette or Dan Schumacher, or, Jesse Raphael here at NYU's work in things like ESPOs or RSQMs, and can we think about, resident sensitive quality metrics or educationally sensitive patient outcomes? What's meaningful to us in terms of residents' performance, and does that correlate with what they've seen educationally? The next step that, the reason I was really passionate about these dashboards and wanted to bring it to our department is that in the UME level, what this has been able to translate to is, let's say, a learner sees a case. I think about when I'm at my best self as a preceptor, I'll go home and I'll email the team and say, hey team, you saw, case of pancreatitis today in this, 17-year-old young man. Here are some articles to read. Here's a nice Cochrane review. Here are the latest guidelines, clinical practice guidelines. And, I do that much less than 40% of the time. Again, when I'm my best preceptor, I'll send those emails. And this work has been automated so that after someone, codes an ICD-10 diagnosis, any name that was affixed to that chart can receive an automated email that pushes, QBank questions, up-to-date articles, and seminal literature from key resources identified institutionally. And that was really one of my goals in getting these educational dashboards kind of to our learners as a next step. And so I think, for us, again, some of this work is what I very nuts and bolts do individually. Some of it is what we do in collaboration. I do think that collaborating is key. I would never have been able to do this without informaticists or data analysts. And again, I think similar to what Aaron was saying, data analysts might not have the lens on what you need educationally. And there's, a lot going on beyond just these, just to highlight some of it. I'm not going to read through all of it, but just thinking about AI in the med ed realm and looking at what's happening, not just institutionally here, but kind of some folks nationally, what they're doing, what I've heard in the last few months, is really thinking about using AI to help us with our holistic review. Most of us at this point have holistic review grids for recruitment, but there's so much data in any given application. Certainly in large programs, we have hundreds of applications, if not thousands. How do you synthesize that to tease out elements of the holistic review or capture things that we might be missing? Is one area. We talked a lot about assessment and feedback, like Amazon summaries of not just faculty, but of learners, and using that to help synthesize all your evaluative and particularly qualitative data. I think there's a lot of room to, speaking to Kelsey's point, use some qualitative analytics to even map, qualitative comments to milestones or EPAs to look at correlations and really use this large volume of qualitative data that historically we've just sort of read as program directors and not really put to necessarily the greatest use. There's work in sort of clinical reasoning and accuracy and looking at large language models in notes. We already share here in internal medicine is doing some of that work, and even looking at visual AI categorizing surgical skills, sort of the efficiency, motor efficiency and surgical skills, and getting feedback on visual performance as well. We talked a little about coaching and development and using AI to generate learning goals. And then I didn't even touch on clinical work. This was all educational, but there's just a huge, when we talk about offloading the SCUT and thinking about ambient AI to write notes for us and maximize our own creative potential, I would love for that day to come. I just write my note by listening to everything that's happening from my pocket. But what I really focus on is like our goal, which is sort of this precision educational model, targeting learning and feedback to the individual. And I think AI will be a great tool. The ethics, the efficiency, the use, getting rid of the waste, getting rid of the hallucinations. I think those are the challenges. But again, none of it would be possible without the team. These are some resources that again come largely from Mark Trio at the IAME that were presented and are shared here with permission, and they're also in the document that Kelsey shared. And just thanks again to everyone who's been on these with me and for letting me dabble and get over my fear of AI to become a more efficient clinician educator, hopefully.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. And I saw someone already put a question in the official Q&A, plus the chat is blowing up, which we will summarize for all of you. We have one more show and tell, and then we're going to open it up for more conversation. So I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Perfect. Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been really fun to hear what everyone else is working on. So my name is Stephen Gradwohl. I'm a assistant professor at Vanderbilt, and I'm in the emergency medicine, of course. And then I also do clinical informatics. I spent a lot of time thinking about CDS and how to implement AI models into clinical workflows. I'll be talking to you actually something I've been doing that's independent of Vanderbilt at a company that I started called Tuition. Again, we envision this as an intuitive way to practice medicine, and we've been very focused over the past year on thinking about how to build an AI simulator. So I'll start with, this patient. 1 second, sorry. So this is Emily Thompson. She's a 17-year-old white female. She's going into the ER with shortness of breath that came on suddenly. She has asthma. She tried her albuterol inhaler, and it's not working. She's also on the pill. She vapes regularly, and her mother has a history of factor V. To kind of make her a little more interesting, we give her a personality. She's optimistic, she's assertive, she's extroverted. Her goal is to be the lead, or she's the lead in the school play tonight, and she cannot miss it. And she values responsibility and commitment. When she comes into the ER, she's breathing fast and her heart rate's fast. Her saturation is 92%. She's got clear lungs. If a provider gets these studies, a D-dimer will be elevated. Her chest X-ray will have no acute findings, and her CT chest angiogram will show a satellite line. So you can imagine this is a great patient for like a question stem or a high fidelity simulation, but these types of things aren't really going to allow us to have very realistic conversations with a patient. And they're not going to allow us to really focus on that and building that skill. Now, conversely, we could spend money on an actress and have them come in, and they could kind of focus on this, like the script, so to speak, but they may not be able to respond to other types of reactions because they just don't have the clinical knowledge or the information available to them to really be able to respond to any kind of question. And plus, they'll cost a lot of money. So this begs the question to me. Let's see. So what if AI could bring my patient to life, and we could have these authentic conversations, and we could adapt and respond to the actions that they could adapt and respond dynamically to any type of question or exam or diagnostic study that the provider requested. And when they were all done with this interaction, could the AI then turn around and become a personal tutor and provide very focused guidance and feedback on this? So this question kind of sparked this idea that led to Tuition. And this is a company that I started a year ago and have been focused on building these types of features. And so during this time, we've built a patient creator and editor that allows us and educators to basically build these customized simulations and be able to put in all the values and the parameters they might want to create captivating learning experiences. We built an AI or interactive AI simulator that allows a provider to interact with a patient in a lifelike manner, to talk with them, to be able to get exam findings and do diagnostic studies and order medications. And then at the end of these things, we designed a thing to give us feedback. And so we can provide assessments on diagnostic skills, clinical management, and communication. And again, we hope that this will then create data where we can do performance analytics, so we can analyze the learner's data, identify growth opportunities, monitor their advancement, and enhance their learning experience overall. So now I'd like to show you what we've been working on and do a quick demo. So this is our patient creator. As we were kind of talking about a little bit ago, being able to, this is an OpenAI custom GPT. And what we've done is provide an interface for you to have kind of a natural conversation and be able to either start from scratch and kind of work towards building your patient. And again, this works towards building the template that we've designed for our simulators. Or you can start from existing content. And again, this is our patient that we described right at the beginning, Emily Thompson. And so what we can do is you can see that this thing will then format it into our template and allows us to then upload it directly to our servers using the custom GPT actions. And when it's all done, it will then send back a link, which allows us then to jump right onto the Clintuition platform and be able to jump right into a simulation. So this is our patient simulator. Again, this is kind of modeled after like almost like an iPhone message or iMessage text-based interface. And it allows us to have these just very direct conversation. I can ask whatever question I want. You can see that she's responding in very interesting ways. She's talking about her school play, how she can't miss it. And I can ask the questions I want and work through my diagnostic process and kind of begin to build a differential and think about what this patient might have. I can move on to different actions where we can perform a physical exam. And I can basically request whatever physical exam. Now I populated this with some preset ones, but you can add any exam that exists into the rest of the interface. And then it will come back and it will populate those findings. You can see that here her lungs are clear. She's got no wheezing. She's increased work of breathing. She looks a little uncomfortable. I can then go on and order diagnostic tests. I can order in a chest x-ray, an EKG, a D-dimer. And again, these things will also populate, and you can see the findings presented here. Now, we can kind of modify this to where if this is a learner that's at the beginning of their career, we might just show that the D-dimer is elevated, or for a more advanced provider, we can then change it and actually provide values, the units, and then the normal ranges, so they have to interpret this themselves. One of the things I'm actually really excited about is the kind of forcing you to kind of close the encounter, where you come back and you summarize and you provide education and guidance. And I've always been very impressed by the questions that the AI or the patient comes back and asks. You can see that it's asking, it's like, is there any way I can go to my school play tonight? Can I do anything to prevent this in the future? So it really forces you to think about your communication and your next steps in a very concrete way. And then we've also built in a tutor that allows you to ask very specific questions. In this one, I'm showing what questions should I ask? And I'm at the very beginning of the simulation. And you can see that it's forming a little bit of a differential and questions to kind of help me gather information. So for early learners, this can help really kind of get them started and get them thinking about what they should be doing here. And for more advanced learners, it might help them think about their differentials, the things that they've missed. So the exciting part at the very end of these simulations is that we can provide these feedback assessments. And so right here on the right, I'm showing you an example of my diagnostic skill assessment. And again, we have a very focused rubric. And you can see that it's applied the rubric to the entire encounter transcript, and then it's provided scoring and justification and recommendations. And we're excited. We have a few different ones we're trying out right now, but in theory, we could add any custom assessment based on whatever the educator's rubric that they want. And then we can apply those to their trainees' transcripts and give them scoring and give them that feedback back. So overall, right now where we're at is we're looking for more for collaborators and people that are interested in working with us. We're looking for beta testers. Right now, you can join our free beta program, and you can basically, that feedback we're using to really iterate and refine the platform. We're looking for educators that are interested in working with us. Again, we want to make sure that we're providing the tools that can align and allow you to create any kind of scenario you're thinking of, and so we can better support the education community. And probably most importantly, we're looking at doing a pilot study. We really want to make sure that we're doing this right. We definitely don't want this out there educating people in an incorrect manner. And so we've been very impressed with our results, but again, we want to be rigorous about this and figure out ways to properly evaluate the accuracy and the reliability of our AI patients and think about potential concerns and where we can mitigate those risks. Again, overall, Clintuition is a platform for AI patients. We're hoping that we can work to make it really, really easy for any educator or anybody, any provider that has had a really unique experience that has been very impressionable upon them, for them to be able to create a patient, share that patient for others around the world to be able to experience that patient in a very dynamic, authentic way and learn from that experience. So if you want to check it out today, you can look at our webpage on the left. And on the right, you can actually try the Emily Thompson patient and see it for yourself. And we'd love to hear from you. So if anyone, this is our email, our website, and all of our stuff on social media. And happy to answer any questions people may have.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope everyone else is feeling as inspired and energized as I am, and probably also a little overwhelmed by all of the possibilities. And so now we have about an hour left to sort of have a discussion. The chat has been blowing up, and so I hope that that enthusiasm continues. We have prepared a couple of discussion questions, but I want you all to weigh in too. So you have met our panelists, but before I formally introduce them one more time, I have a couple more songs by the great music creator of our time. So Batteries Down the Hatch, if you'd like to download this one. And finally, Seize the Moment. So again, you can see lots of different genres here too. But again, just a thank you and round of a virtual applause for the 4 folks who have so generously shared their experiences and expertise with us today. We have a couple of specific questions just to follow up from the presentation that I'd like to start with. Maybe first was from David for Selin. How are you disclosing the use of AI for evaluations and to the students? And then sort of second, are you using this at promotion committee presentations, and how do you talk about that?
Yeah, again, we get sort of the benefit of the fact that it's now institutionalized. So anytime I email the faculty or the learners the evaluations that come from AI, I make it pretty explicit. I say, here are your, a summary of your learning evaluations over the last 6 months. Please note these are summarized using NYU GPT-4, which I've also read over and edited below. And same thing for anything that's used for promotion committee. So any portfolios that are made, honestly at this point, like I saw some of the chat comments being like, oh, are you using AI detect? Like, are we going to be using AI detectors? Is this kind of loud? I think at this point, like the train has left the station. I think we can assume that, everybody is using AI to write everything. And it's, a question of, hopefully the humans are then checking it and verifying the accuracy. So yeah, it's fully disclosed, but it's also, I think, becoming acculturated here at this point, many of these things.
That was perfect. Thank you. And I think, Stephen, you might have had a chance to respond to this in the chat. One other question for you was sort of what is the back engine you're using for Clintuition? And so if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so right now we're using OpenAI's GPT-4o. We've gone through the different versions they've kind of released over time, and I thought we were going to initially be doing a little bit of training on top of that model, but honestly, it's working really, really well without it. So we've designed our platform to be able to pivot to whatever large language model we need for whatever use case. But so far, we've been primarily focused with OpenAI, and it's been working really, really well.
Awesome. So I want to take a step back before all of the amazing work that the 4 of you shared today and sort of ask about how much experience you had with sort of technology and informatics before starting this, and then what you've needed to do or how you've built up your skills in order to sort of engage with this emerging technology. So maybe Aaron, we'll start with you.
Sure. So David Kessler can probably say something familiar in which the point of care ultrasound community kind of attracts a tech-based community that's interested in being sort of on the forefront of the methodologies. And so for me in 2016, when I saw some of this technology coming down the pipes, I became more interested. I think some of it comes through just reading and listening and learning and seeing what's available, and some of it comes through more formal didactics. So here at UCSF, we have a master's program in data science, which I am currently taking as well. And so there are definitely a lot of different ways to get your hands wet and kind of learn a little bit more about AI. And as you can see from the presenters, there's like a pretty wide range of what you can do and what methods you can do to get there. The key, I think, really is, for me at least, has been just doing projects. And through those projects, you learn some of the language, you learn some of the tech, and you learn a little bit more so of anything else. You learn about the faults of AI as you go through each of those projects as well. So, yeah.
I don't know if any of our other three want to add or weigh in. It looks like both David and Stephen unmuted, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's interesting. Selin, first of all, who's not a Luddite at all. I think it's, I'll call that out as just innovative thinking, and for me, it's, I'm not any more of a technologist than anyone else. I wouldn't even say I'm an early adopter. I'm kind of an early doubter. Like, I like to see the trends and then be like, hey, what's this simulation thing? Does that even work? Let's study it. So I've approached it more from a research standpoint. With ultrasound, similarly, like I started one of the first fellowships in the country around because once I saw that tool, and how useful it was clinically, I became a believer of that early on. But it really just comes from trying and testing. I would say in my current role as vice chair of innovation, like every week I'm meeting with a new industry, especially, nowadays it's AI, it's AR, it's virtual reality. And, 90% of it, I'm like, this won't exist 2 weeks from now, so it's part of it's being a futurist too, and saying, okay, where's this all going? When it comes to AI, I agree it's inevitable. And so I think, we need to be sort of in academia, like the stewards of ethical use and how we want to use it, and sort of try to be the gatekeeper somewhat of, the application of technology in healthcare.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. For me, my background was engineering, so I've always enjoyed dabbling and building little side projects here and there. I've been building models since undergrad, and again, it's been really fun to see the sophistication of the models just continue to explode over the last 2 decades. I think for me, it's just, again, not just playing with these tools. I think there's a lot of little like online classes that I've taken here and there, like just little modules that have taught me a little bit here and there about what these things can do. And that has been helped me kind of keep aware, or like stuff on the radar. I did a deep learning thing in fellowship, and it was just a few modules, a Coursera course. And I remember seeing transformer models for the first time then, and playing around with what they could generate. And I remember it kicked out a little sentence. I was like, that's cute. It's, not useful for anything, but amazed that it could like kind of do something along the lines of what we now see as prompt in the response. And so now it's like, last year it was just like all of a sudden this thing, ChatGPT burst onto the scene. And it was like, oh my gosh, this can do way more than it could do 5 years ago. And then, just seeing how fast, even like when 4 came out, and all of a sudden ideas that I had thought about that were not possible, 5 years ago, or all of a sudden now possible. And then just being willing to play with this. And I think persistence is key, and iterations are key. Often these things don't work the first time, and you have to sit there and just keep playing with the model or the prompt and trying different things. And I'm amazed that often I can eventually get it to work with what I was wanting to do. It just takes a lot of time. So those are my 2 thoughts.
Perfect. Selin, I'd also love to hear from you. Because I agree, you seem like you have grown exponentially in this, and just how have you managed to do that?
No, really, thank you for the vote of confidence, but I am somebody who had like an iPhone 6, I think, until a year ago. I don't have an e-reader, like I read paper books. I tend to, I hope innovate, but I do tend to resist technology, and I really do believe in the art and craft of writing. So it was definitely a leap of faith for me to like embrace using AI to write, especially. But again, I think for me, collaboration has been the key. We have monthly meetings in our department with our education informatics team, just to talk about sort of the projects and the ideas. We've built that into sort of like a mini med lab in our own department. And then we have monthly meetings with, the faculty in our department who work with IIME. And I, do love language. And so the idea of vector embedding and large language models, I think, has spoken to me in a way that I would have never predicted sort of data analytics could. And I think for those of us who enjoy qualitative research like language, I think these are technologies that are easier to sort of adapt and understand and get on board with, which has been sort of my entree, I guess, into it. But I really would just, put in a plug for collaboration. My very smart man, who happened to have been my dentist when I was a child, said, in order to be truly successful, you have to make your weaknesses your strengths. And I think I've just tried to kind of embrace that in the partnerships.
That's perfect. We have a couple of questions from the audience coming in, and but before we moved on to those, I just wanted to ask, all of you have sort of mentioned collaborations, both in your presentations and in your answers. And I just wonder if you could talk about sort of where you've looked for those and how you've found those and how you've made those successful. That would be great, because I would love to learn more.
I'm still on the early phases of that process, but I started with people that I've learned, met throughout training, and just kind of knocked on the doors like, hey, can you try this out? Give me feedback, and then use those ideas to improve the model, and then reach back out again. So.
Kelsey, sorry, could you repeat the question? I was answering in Suresh's chat and I missed
No,
it.
I was just wondering about how you have identified and built relationships with collaborators and sort of turned those into successful collaborations.
Yeah, I think it's things like this, right? I mean, I'm after this call, I'm like, ooh, I want to talk to all these people. It's just generating that excitement, and I think AAP is a place that I found a lot of great collaborators in medical education specifically. Don't underestimate the power of just sort of like-minded nerdiness and curiosity, just leading to some fun projects.
Yeah, I would recommend folks really spend a little time kind of honing in on what that problem is they're looking to address. Honestly, as you can see, the breadth of what you can do here is vast, and without having a problem that you want to address, you can easily get lost in a little bit of and swooped up into a world of AI in which the options are a little bit endless. How to find those collaborators after you have addressed that problem. At our institution, we have multiple different avenues to do that. So we're closely tied here at UCSF with the UC Berkeley campus. And so there's a data science program that exists at UC Berkeley, a master's in translational medicine program, a statistics program. All of those programs are looking to address real problems. And again, one of the biggest barriers to when you're in the data science world is understanding the workflows that exist within our lives and where our problems are. And so if you can identify a problem in which you think a tech solution may be able to help, that's when you could bring that to a team and really generate a lot of what Dave is talking about, that excitement around those ideas. After that, things start to bloom. The one other recommendation as you start having these conversations would be communication is key. And it's funny how quickly you run into communication failures when you're crossing disciplines like this. And so in our lab group, we keep something that we call the Rosetta Stone, which is once you come across a new word that you haven't heard of before, you write it down on the stone so that as new people are brought into our lab group, they can easily kind of catch up and figure out what's going on. And so this exists in everything. In the AI world, you know, if you say test versus validation, they may not know what you're talking about. Versus in our world, study versus examination, or even the word emesis becomes kind of interesting as you start looking through like everything that comes up. And so I would say language stability is a big part of the early phases of collaboration with a lot of these groups as well. But I would hone in on where you are and a little bit of what resources exist already after you've kind of focused in at least on a general idea for a problem.
Perfect. And I saw Selin also put a nice comment in the chat about sort of engaging with your clinical informatics group as well. So I think I'm going to move on because there's lots of noise in the chat about sort of the potential applications at the bedside. And I think sort of the capacity for the existing technologies in terms of like ChatGPT apps for the phone, as well as the potential for sort of AI for note building and integration to the EHR. And so people have already, Stephen and I think David have already been commenting, but maybe we can take that conversation out of the chat and online and hear your thoughts about that.
Definitely. So ChatGPT or OpenAI in general is starting to form BAs with healthcare systems, and which means you can use their API calls with patient information. One of the things we're doing at Vanderbilt is actually we have with our Databricks solutions, being able to actually send patient information through in real time, which lets us start to build like Fire applications and other types of tools to do these kinds of work with OpenAI and with large language models. So you can imagine like data summarization, using things like RAG, where we cannot let things hallucinate, where you're trying to just basically embed on all the different items that are maybe in your EHR and then do search, like semantic search, and be able to go find the things that you're looking for using just natural language. That's coming down the pipe. Being able to help create patient education tools based on their current ER visit is coming down the pipe. And so I think as OpenAI does more of these partnerships and provides the tools that are kind of open or available to the community into actually the HIPAA compliant versions, this will be really profound for us. So right now you can just do the API, but ChatGPT is coming soon, which again will open up all the, I don't know if you guys have played with 4.0 and its ability to do just very natural conversation. It's really, really amazing.
That's the interesting thing, like the pace of this stuff. And Stephen, I applaud you for even like starting a company. I mean, I'm too intimidated to go out there. I'm always like, academia gives me a salary, but the pace of AI especially, right, makes the exit like a question. Like I you know, resident approach about a project on discharge instructions. Let's help, you know, translate to Spanish, that sort of stuff. And other than, you know, this discussion we're having about, you know, actually using it clinically and some of the restrictions, which will go away soon. But in that moment, it's sort of like, well, what do you do for that particular resident project? I find it really hard that we don't really have the, we can't compete in this realm right now as academics because there's so many restrictions to us. And yet at some point, the institution will just purchase a giant license and some company will sort of come in. At the same time, we need to stay involved in the conversation and you know, help do the research and help drive the change, just like we would help decide what antibiotics on pharmacy or formulary. So I think that's the challenge we're facing right now. And you know, regarding the discharge instructions, it's like when we did a search, there's so many companies that have popped up already, including being able to make a replica of David give the discharge instructions to your patient in real time, but like have AI generated based on what the chart said. You know, like these things already exist now, but it's going so quickly. I don't know, by the time I write an IRB to study one thing, probably there's going to be something else that already came. So I don't know, I'm curious how everyone else is dealing with that kind of pace at which things are going.
And Kelsey, do you mind? We actually have another AI. I don't know if we're all experts in our own mind, but lots of experience, I think, you know, gets you far. Dr. Suresh is on the call now. And we've been having kind of a back channel discussion about some other use case scenarios and some experience. If you don't mind, I can have him jump in on the Zoom as well.
That would be great. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Kelsey. This is great. I'm Srinivasan Suresh. I go by Suresh. Stephen, good to see you. I'm a pediatric physician at Children's Hospital Pittsburgh, the hospital CMIO. Learning a lot from this conversation. A couple of points I'll make. One is there was some talk about AI-driven recording, note-taking software. So we use a product called a Bridge, which is actually developed by a UPMC cardiologist, but our hospital is a client now for that product. It works well when you're seeing patients without residents and fellows, just because of the workflow. No special consent is needed. App on the phone records a normal conversation with the child or the parent or the caregiver. And once you finish that initial conversation and come back to your computer, there are 3 outputs. One is the, let's say, 6 or 8 minute conversation, the audio of it, word for word, just like an audio recording. The second one is the text rendition, word for word, of that 6-minute conversation. The third one, which is the cool part, is the first draft of your ED, physician note. And it takes about 60 seconds to do it. So by the time you get out of the room and come back to your computer, it's already there. The accuracy is near 100%. In some hospitals that have used Epic, it's already integrated, so you don't have to do anything. We don't have Epics in our EMR, it's still copy pasting. But I can copy paste the HBI. It already divides it into HBI review systems, medical decision making, assessment, and plans. It's literally a matter of copy pasting. So accuracy is good, but the biggest advantage is it saves time. Normally, even if I use regular drag and dictation, if it takes me, I don't know, 6 minutes for a note, let's say this one is now way less than 2 minutes, because all I'm doing is looking at the draft and making changes and finalizing the note. The weird downside is it is so good, so I've not needed to make any changes the last few of my notes. So then you get into the habit of, if I'm not making any changes, should I just hit OK and not review the output? So that is one. And the other one is not sure if folks, I think David answered this, to use the GPT app on the smartphone at the patient's bedside. You can do this on a computer too, but the phone has some the iPhone does it, I'm sure Android does too, the text to speech function. So basically I have used this about 10 times, where my prompt at the bedside was, and these were real patients, I said, can you provide discharge instructions for asthma at the reading or the literacy level of a 10-year-old in 5 bulleted points. So that was my exact prompt, because when I did it, it gave me 9 bullet points. I didn't want 9, I wanted 5. So that was my prompt. And this was really useful because I'm doing it at the patient's bedside. And when the output comes in, you can highlight that and just let the phone speak. So now the phone is talking to the child, which we actually don't do that much. Most of the time, we're still talking to the parents and the caregivers, right? When we're giving discharge instructions. So now this 10-year-old was really happy that somebody was actually talking to him in his language. And the actual bullet points are not something that we don't know. Use an inhaler, avoid this, hydration and all that. But the consistency is the key part. I'm not sure whether I can provide all those instructions at the end of a long shift. So this one does it in 5 bullet points, or however you specify it. So the child was happy, the parents were happy that somebody was actually talking to the child. I was happy because the child was happy and the parents were happy. So lots of practical uses like that using the smartphone app at the bedside. The last point I'll make is, and some of your sites may already be doing it, integrating into Epic some of these functions. And Epic has sort of classified this into chart summarization, automation, documentation, and one more bucket I'm forgetting. So the chart summarization would be really useful. So imagine any of us working in the ER, and we get a patient who is a complex neurosurgery patient, let's say, and I've not seen the patient, and I'm doing a quick H&P and looking at maybe the last note or the last operative note, and I'm calling the neurosurgeon for a consult. That's what we do today. But with Gen AI, we can get a really focused chart summarization, because the prompt we'll be putting in inside the EHR would be, I'm the ED physician, I need a chart summary of this patient because I'm putting in a neurosurgeon consult. So it gives you the gist of it, what exactly we need to say, how many short positions, etc. So you don't have to go through all of that. So that's this is one potential application of what Gen AI can do once it is integrated with the native EHRs. And thanks, Brad, for putting in the plug. Some of you may have attended this AAP webinar series. I chair the Council for Clinical Information Technology for the AAP. So we started this Gen AI. It's more on focus on Gen AI, so not overall AI applications in pediatrics for pediatricians. We started this in October. We've had a webinar once a month. You can watch it live or the recordings or on the website Brad just put in. And it's open to anyone. This is not limited to AAP members. We chose to put it on a public website, aap.org/AI. I'll be reaching out to some of you for future webinars, and we have done the applications of value of Gen AI in pediatric clinical care, research, practice management, education, ethics, liability, all of those things. So please take some time to take a look at it and give me feedback. Sorry, last point. Somebody talked about neuromind's, I think, or maybe I was actually NeoMind AI is the website that our neuroetology colleagues have put together. It is really good. Lots of technical stuff as well as practical AI applications. When we talk about collaboration, this may be a little bit of offline topic to whoever is interested to do something like that for them. I think it would be really useful. So it becomes like a one-stop site or storage for all things AI. Thank you.
Suresh, before you go, one other question that was coming up in the chat is how have these bedside applications worked with people who are who may not have an English language preference?
Yeah, it is the language accuracy. I have to look it up. I know it does 50 languages now, GPT-4. I don't know the answer for the accuracy part of it. The feasibility is there. You can within the app, or you can copy paste what you get out of GPT-4 into Google Translate and do it. But it's a great tool at bedside too. Just the variety of languages. And if you think about it, you're not at that point. I've already quote unquote dumbed it down to the patient level, right? So we're not using the word emissaries or those kinds of things. It's already at a layman language. But for it to be either converted to a 10-year-old reading level or translated in any other languages, it's very useful. I'm still going to use it because I think even if there are a couple of inaccuracies, the benefits outweigh. There's not good direct patient harm.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. One of the things I wanted to come back that I heard in your comments and some of David's comments earlier is just thinking about sort of the ethical guardrails we're going to put around this technology as it's evolving so quickly, and particularly as educators, sort of what is our role to help set those guardrails? I don't know if any of our panelists have spent some time thinking about that, but I would love to hear your thoughts, insights, musings.
It's a huge topic in itself. One, there are ethics, and two, there are policies. There are some federal policies, state level, institutional policies and workflows. Our own individual hospitals are different. It is hard. So that's why I'm still not a big fan of using it for actual diagnosis and treatment. It's nice to show it to trainees saying that, hey, these are the signs and symptoms, what's the differential diagnosis? I don't think it's ready for it at all. But for note-taking, for discharge instructions, for chart summarizations, for handoffs, those are the things where I think the use case scenarios or the research should go in. And one of the quick points, I know we talk about images and videos, we need to be careful. GPT and other tools are really good for text. They are getting better for images. Still lots of inaccuracies, and they're not good for videos. It's too risky at this point. You can type in, at least till a month ago, you can put in, please output a picture of a white pediatrician taking care of a black child. I mean, this is an actual example, and the image which came out was absolutely not representative. So it's still going off of the corpus, and I've talked to folks in OpenAI and Microsoft. It's not as easy as them going in and changing settings and say, hey, when somebody asks for a black kid, give this output. It's not that easy because it searches the entire internet and then some. So, sorry, long answer to your question, Kelsey, but ethics, liability, institutional policies, all of those need to be considered.
I think one of the simple things that we need to just do is like I said, I've never been an early adopter, but I'm an early skeptic. And what worries me about this is that some of these things are going to, like I said, the pressure is going to come to adopt these at an institutional level. And we're going to feel sort of powerless to ask questions about it. But I think that's our role with every aspect of medicine. Why is this antibiotic not on formulary anymore? This is, I believe the evidence is behind this. So I think we won't keep pace with the evidence-based medicine, like we'll, trying to research every single thing that comes out. But I think we could still apply the last human thing, which is critical thinking and skepticism, and say, where's the evidence behind this? Show it to me, and maybe we'll just pressure, on the institutional level that they don't commit to these things unless they're really involving frontline physicians and clinicians in some of this process of how we're going to apply it. As Aaron points out, what problem are we solving? And the only other thing I'll say is that I'm very worried about the business case for this. I sit in multiple roles, and I think from a leadership perspective, it's very easy to think, oh, this is a great way to measure people, measure productivity, push towards efficiencies. Okay, listen, I would like dictating software that makes my charting faster, but then if they're changing my RVUs to say I should see 10 more patients an hour, that's not the purpose of why I want it. I want to free up more time with the patient. So are we really rooted in the values that we have? And are we driving that forward as a workforce?
David, if I can add to it, it is such a great point. We're talking about Abridge and other tools, which you can show that it reduces your documentation time or pajama time, however you call it. But that is based on the physician burnout and the cognitive overload that we have. So it does help with that. But the moment we say that if I'm seeing 20 patients in a shift by myself, which is not usual, your trainees, etc. But if I say 4 minutes, 2 minutes per chart to document, suddenly I have an hour extra. And that hour is just going to help me feel less busy. It should not be senior patients. In the ED setting, it's a little hard to do that math, but in clinic settings, which is where the ambient AI documentation is being used a lot, it's really becoming an issue. And folks are going to look at the time saved and then say, hey, now you can see your patients.
Selin, as our self-proclaimed skeptic, I'd love to hear from you and what you think, to pick up David's thread.
Yeah, I think from an educational perspective, just most immediately, I worry about FERPA and educational privacy. And I think that's where, I've seen some of the chat commenting on, HIPAA compliant GPT for clinical use, but we also have to remember FERPA compliance, and the fact that our learners' information is also private residence, and how staff fall into this funny FERPA zone where, depending on which court case you read, you might consider them learners versus employees, but I think the same principles apply. Again, my biggest hurdle is sort of the, intellectual property or was the intellectual property or creativity of AI, and just getting over that hump of oh, it's not mine, I didn't write it. And I've come to embrace it for lack of a better term, boring academic writing, formulaic letters, portfolios, dossiers. Things don't necessarily require a whole lot of personalization or, unique thought processes, right? I still haven't worked out my sentiments on how I feel. You started with academic writing that does require ingenuity and unique thought and your intellectual perspective, similar to what I would consider the fiction space, or anything that's really idea generative. I haven't worked out my sentiments on the use of AI for that quite yet. To me, that's the big ethical question. But I think that we're going to have to find some way to collaborate with the robots in all realms of our writing. I have my sister-in-law and brother-in-law are in LA, and they were, at the front of the picket line during the strikes. And I had initially thought that they would be completely against the use of generative AI in Hollywood and in creative writing, and in script generation. And instead, their approach to it is very similar as my letters of rec, where they're I can use AI to give me a scaffolding for my ideas, and still the creative overlay and the conception and the ideas and the artistry is mine. But it's like having an intern give me the bare bones of a script. It's no different. It's just a computerized intern rather than a human intern.
Thank you. I'll have Stephen go, and then I saw Aaron had come off unmute before too. So we'll go Stephen and then Aaron.
Just a few thoughts. So I just dropped this in the chat. Meta's Llama 3 is now approaching performance metrics of GPT-4. You can run this on your own computer, depending upon what kind of graphics card you have. So that will allow for complete privacy, right? Because like you're now doing inference on your own system and it's not going elsewhere. So these, I mean, this is today, right? Like in a year from now, there's gonna probably be something that surpasses GPT-4. So these will be something that you can run with complete privacy into the future. Thinking about some of the stuff you mentioned is just like informatics, like the paradigm is that, you know, it's the computer plus a provider is better than the provider alone, right? So like I think of these things as augmenting what we can do, right? I can now write emails faster, I can generate notes faster. All of these things can do more efficiently with less workload or the same workload, and do it more efficiently than I could do before. And so I think that's how we should try and frame these types of discussions. Thinking about some of the fears, I posted a really interesting TED Talk from the CEO of Khan Academy, and he talked about, he was one of those things that made, because I initially was very, very skeptical of all this stuff. I was like, man, this is really going to destroy people's desire to learn things. And he kind of talked from the approach of a tutor, and that's what got me thinking about what would a tutor look like in medicine, and how could that facilitate our learning process and teach us about diagnostic skill and all things. So again, I have a lot of that TED Talk was very inspiring for me, and so I think it's definitely a good listen. His book just came out this past week too, which talks about a lot of these types of principles. So very, very interesting. And then thinking about like, you know, people have said the same types of things about, like, so I'm in informatics and clinical decision support, like order sets. People were very skeptical about that, and that it would kind of take away from people's learning. But it also reduced a lot of the variability that we would see in prescribing, and would help align people with best evidence practices. So I think there's always a bit of a trade-off as these types of tools make it easier and easier to practice consistently and along gold standards of medicine, that we are offloading some of that mental memory into the system. And so it is a trade-off. The question is that trade-off worth the risk reduction or the improved patient outcomes? And again, I don't have an answer for that. I just think that this is the same kind of story as these tools get better and better. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with the panelists here, and that is, you know, we're all looking to bring AI into medicine safely, ethically, and cost effectively. And I really think of the use of AI medicine in kind of three different domains. There's the sort of science of medicine, and that's the academic side of me, at least. That's like the EDU side of me. There's the practice of medicine, in which we can improve actually how we diagnose things. But then there's the delivery of healthcare, and that's, you know, a little bit of what Stephen's talking about here too. That's sort of my .org self, where I'm doing more of the NSF side of things as well. And when you think about those things, David Kessler brought up a good point at the beginning of this, where he asked about what's the timeline. The speed of this stuff is moving just so fast, and how do you keep up with the speed? But then at the same time, how do you fit it into this science of medicine, practice of medicine, and delivery of healthcare, and make sure you're kind of thinking about all of these things as you're working? And, you know, for me, the way I think about it is, again, I sort of split myself into those two different hats of that .org and that .edu self. The .edu self is the bigger kind of loftier goals, that sort of is looking at some of the AI tools that are the future of what we're looking at. And that might be within some of the practice of medicine. So that's the diagnosis. That's the stuff that may not be ready for prime time yet. But in the next few years, as we see these models improve and our ability to harness the power of AI, it might change. In contrast, I also think of that other side, the .org self, which is really more focused on a shorter timeline, and that's the low-hanging fruit. So that's, can I create a project, for example, using large language models to identify missed procedure notes, is something that we're working on right now. And so that's the little things that build trust in a community. The way I sort of think about it is if someone handed you a smart device early in the course of sort of iPads and iPods, and they told you, here's your banking device, go ahead and do all your banking now on this small device, you would tell them to take a hike. That being said, if they told you this is now a portable jukebox that's going to hold all the music you've ever wanted, start with that. Exactly. I could see the dancing, Brad. So then you know, like that's really where this needs to start, is with that low-hanging fruit that we could take a bite and actually believe in what we're using and get comfortable with it before we could go on to the bigger things in the science and practice of medicine. So again, it may focus at first on this delivery of healthcare. Now we do have to be careful because, like Dave mentioned, we can't also let the delivery of healthcare overcome everything we're doing on the science and practice of medicine. Otherwise, we get stuck with all these tools that help us just move more efficiently without really giving back to the community and which we're caring for, which is both the patients and ourselves. So I would say getting involved early again with a project is probably, I don't want to keep like plugging the same thing over and over again, but it's really how you get yourself sort of entrenched in this world and figuring out where all the barriers do exist.
There's so much profound thought, which I think just speaks to how intentional we need to be about this. I want to acknowledge that this is a community that's brought together by education. And also the theme we've heard throughout all of this is sort of like the requirement for the ability to be skeptical, and the requirement for the ability to understand the problem, and the requirement to sort of understand what you're getting. And so I would love to talk a little bit specifically about how we think this might impact our learners. And have you asked the learners how they're using it, and sort of what are your concerns about learners using this as they are sort of developing that capacity to deliver clinical care?
So we were witnessing residents using this for diagnoses and writing notes early on, and that got quickly stopped, right? Like they basically were like, oh, we're seeing OpenAI calls from our intranet, and it was just quickly axed. So I mean, I think people will look for tools that make their lives easier. And I think it was very interesting to see that our residents were thinking about this and seeing that they, oh, wow, this can help me come up with a diagnosis, or I can write discharge instructions with this. And so, I mean, like, I think this is, I don't know, maybe just encouraging to see that like these use cases have a need, like they will meet it. We just got to think about how to carefully implement them. It's just an interesting observation.
One of the things that we've implemented in our EHRs, which I'm sure some other Epic users here have too, is disappearing text, particularly in the assessment plans. When we think about the new MDM-based billing and coding, you know, if your patient came with abdominal pain, there's disappearing text in the assessment plan that prompts you to think about what's your interception song, Brad? That prompts you to think about, you know, all of the various differential diagnoses that might be there for a patient of that age and chief complaint, so that you can be sure to chart in a way that maximizes sort of your medical decision making. You know, you talk about discharge instructions, and I think one of the things that all of us have found so frustrating in the EHR is patients come in and they have this huge chart, and it's really hard to get a snapshot summary of, you know, active problem lists, most recent discharge. You know, that is something that is like right for AI. Just take all of the information in that chart, summarize it into like a nice nugget that you can, you know, use to understand who your patient is in a snapshot. I do think I really liked the comment of how technology has always promised us efficiency, but so far we've been saddled, you know, by its burdens. I think that's like a great question of how do we ensure that it really does that 40% doesn't add to our workload. The other comment I put in the chat was the equity lens. You know, we've chatted a lot about gender biased language. You know, we know that the AI is as biased and racist as the humans who make it or the data that feeds into it. But I think just ensuring that the data is representative and diverse, so that we could have representative models is important. But then, you know, I think about like being in a well-resourced place and all this amazing use applications that we're speaking of. And if you're a medical student, you know, in an institution that has learning prompts and summarized feedback evals and MDM prompts, and you're a beneficiary of this really advanced AI technology compared to somebody who might be training and learning at an institution that doesn't benefit from those resources, we really have, you know, we run the risk of widening sort of the equity gaps in our educational systems rather than narrowing the equity gaps.
David, I see you off mute. Would you like to add something?
No, I think it, for me, it just comes down to how, with everything, how are we teaching critical thinking? It's not a new challenge. I think what's new is going to be the pace of, like, I think about Up to Date. When I was training, they were like, it was like an anthem, like, don't look at Up to Date ever. And now it's like, really, it's an acceptable resource. You know, I don't hate for it, but I do like to know that, like, people reading through it are like, so I don't know. I'd say that when I was a fellow, people were like, it was like, look at the references. So when I was doing it, like, don't do it. Then it was like, look at the references. And then it was like, now they just say, this is what Up to Date says, as if that's like an okay thing to say. And I'm like, all right, what's the topic it's on? Is it a summary of expert opinion? Who are the people who wrote it? Like, I just want people to always be asking those questions. And now we're going to have a new Up to Date type thing, like every week, you know, not knowing the people who wrote it or who's behind it all the time, not having the time to research everything. But I think it just comes down to, like, are we teaching people critical thinking? I think part of that is not banning it, but embracing it. So there's always those two schools of thought, like in academia, like the people who are like, you can't use, you know, AI for writing your essay, versus the ones who are changing how they grade, or saying, hey, let's actually use AI all you want, learn how to use it, and I'm going to grade you in this following way, so that if you don't use critical thinking, like, you will not do well on this exam. So I think we have to adapt in terms of how we teach critical thinking, and how we teach people to use the tools available to them. Yeah,
You know,
4.0 is the free version, because there was a paid 4.0, and now basically the power of 4.0 is in 4.0, with not quite as much of a connection to the visuals. It can make little line drawings, I've found. It doesn't really flip to the Dolly type images like the paid 4.0 does, but you could also do that free through Dolly.
perfect. And I'm realizing we are approaching the end of our time together. And so I wanted to end by giving our panelists a chance to share any mistakes or missteps or sort of important lessons learned as you've attempted to integrate AI into sort of your uses for education or clinical care. And so maybe we'll start, well, I'll see, does anyone have one that immediately pops to mind?
I'm happy to jump in.
Thank you.
So the way I was view clintuition is like, we were making patients, we were simulating patients, and we were doing feedback on patients. And initially we were creating just like a patient's generator. And it was, I think it did a good job, but it was kicking out all sorts of, you know, just kind of weird things. So I think it spoke to, like, we had to have more eyes on this, and that we probably needed to focus more on collaborating with educators who had much more specific ideas of patients that really kind of were going to meet an educational need. And so I thought that was an interesting experience, because again, our beta testers were kind of giving us feedback. Like, I don't know, they were kind of not as engaged because the patients that we're doing were just like not relevant to them, or not, didn't quite make sense. So that was an early misstep that we had, that we were able to correct, and then improve the overall quality of the simulations we were creating. Again, I think I'd stress on all of this. It's been a giant iterative process that we are always trying to find where it's not working, and then making those minor modifications to our prompts that then, you know, and that's all based on feedback, and that dramatically has improved the quality over time. So
Our initial summaries of our faculty evals, like the first few iterations of summarizing, there was like an amplification problem. It was almost like PCR, where, you know, it would tell you the end of comments that it was generating from. But then it would repeat the same. This faculty member needs to be more efficient in their discharge process or whatever, and it would make it look like that was coming from like 6 discrete sources, but somehow it was amplifying the source it came from. So it took a while to verify, you know, the data sources, and to ensure they were discrete, and that it was N evaluations rather than N comments within the same evaluation.
I'll just say something I'm still struggling with is that balance between how to carve out some time and sustainability in your career of this, right? So, and who ultimately is sort of at the top of that food chain owning the data. So for example, like I presented today, an ultrasound thing that, we did locally. I have complete creative control over it. I have no intention to commercialize it, but I could if I wanted to, and it probably won't go very far or into too many hands. If I'm very hopeful, then, Brad will send it out eventually and some people will use it all over the world. But on the other side, like the very big projects I've been involved that are sort of government funded or sort of industry related, they're very bureaucratic. That it's some of the products become more of a committee, like more of a zebra rather than the horse that you want from that clinical use case Aaron's talking about. And so where's that balance between, where we get involved as frontline clinicians? You could be a small part of something that might be way more generalized, but not perfect, or you could sort of toil away forever trying to make something perfect that will never really have an impact.
I would say that idea of the problem behind the problem and making sure you capture everything in writing is super important as you go through, like Steven suggested, that iterative process of thinking through things. Or if you've set down, you've gone down a project pathway and you realize you have to take a shift in whatever it is you're doing. If it's all written down, it makes it so much easier to go back and remember what it is you've done. And every single one of these projects, the creativity really comes in from making those choices as you go. So again, writing that stuff down has been a huge, has changed the way we're able to actually do the iterative process and move forward on each of the projects I've been part of.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much to our 4 panelists for sharing your experiences and your wisdom, and for a very engaged audience for asking all of your questions. Yes, lots and lots and lots of applause for everyone. We had already compiled some resources. We will add the dramatically increased amount of resources we have after today. And we'll distribute that with the recording of this session. So you can look forward to that popping into your inboxes soon. We have one more ask before you go, which is that looking forward, we're looking for your input for fall 2024 and our next sort of similar offering. So if you have any chance to fill out this survey either now or in the next little bit, we would really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day, and hopefully everyone's starting to enjoy the arrival of spring. So thank you so much, and look forward to us sharing all of these amazing chats and resources with you soon.